you happy now? You completely ruined my sister's wedding! Get these animals out of here!
You know, there's a specific kind of audacity that you can only find in people who think the world exists solely to serve as the background for their Instagram photos. A level of entitlement so thick you could cut it with a knife and spread it on toast. And I never thought I'd see it weaponized until I woke up one Tuesday and found a funeral home's worth of white roses and a circus tent parked on the land my daddy died protecting. I'm talking about my north pasture, 14 acres of rolling Kentucky bluegrass and clover that has been in the Galloway family since before the county even had paved roads. A plot of earth that I now manage solo since the old man passed last winter. Just me, 300 head of black Angus, and enough silence to actually hear yourself think, or at least that was the arrangement until the Oakbridge Estates Homeowners Association decided that my property rights were just a suggestion they could ignore because it inconveniently got in the way of their aesthetic vision. Let me paint the picture for you. I'm Clint. I'm 34. And I look exactly like what I am, a man who spends more time with cows than people and prefers it that way, living in a farmhouse that's got creaky floorboards and a porch that leans a little to the left, standing as the last line of defense against the creeping beige plague of suburbia that's been eating up the countryside for the last decade. My ranch, the Double G, borders this cookie-cutter subdivision called Oakbridge, a place where the grass is measured with rulers and the trash cans have to be hidden behind screens. That cost more than my truck, and ruling over this little kingdom of enforced conformity was a woman named Meredith Vane, the HOA president, a woman who drove a pearl-white Lexus SUV that had never seen a speck of dirt and wore yoga pants as formal wear, always carrying a clipboard like it was the nuclear launch codes. Meredith and I had a history. See, she'd come over the fence line a few times before, once to tell me that my tractor was visually aggressive and another time to suggest that I paint my barn a neutral taupe to match the neighborhood's color palette, to which I politely told her that the only thing getting painted on my land was the fence, and she was welcome to grab a brush or get off my property before the bull decided she looked like a threat. I thought that was the end of it, just another suburbanite realizing that rural life isn't a petting zoo. But I underestimated the sheer, unadulterated gall of a woman who believes she's the main character in everyone else's movie. It started last Wednesday. I was out checking the south fence line where a storm had knocked down an old oak, sweating through my shirt and thinking about nothing but a cold beer and a hot shower, when I saw a convoy of box trucks rolling slowly down the county road that runs parallel to my north pasture. I didn't think much of it. Figured maybe the Millers down the road were getting a new roof, or maybe someone in the subdivision was moving out. God knows the turnover rate in Oakbridge is high because nobody can afford the dues, so I tipped my hat to the drivers and went back to work, spending the rest of the day wrestling with barbed wire and stubborn posts. But that night, around 10 o'clock, I stepped out onto the porch to let my dog, Buster, do his business, and I saw a glow coming from the north field, brighter than the moon, brighter than anything that should be happening on grazing land at that hour. It looked like a UFO had touched down, giant beams of light cutting through the mist, the hum of diesel generators drifting on the wind, replacing the cricket song with an industrial drone that made my teeth ache. I grabbed my keys, threw my boots back on, and drove my truck out there, bouncing over the ruts, my headlights sweeping across the grass until they landed on something that made me slam on the brakes so hard I nearly ate the steering wheel. It wasn't a UFO. It was a wedding venue. I'm talking a full-scale, Hollywood production level setup right there on my soil. The soil my dad and I had reseeded just last spring. There was a massive white marquee tent with cathedral windows, a polished wooden dance floor laid directly over the clover, round tables with gold Chiavari chairs, elaborate floral arches that smelled like a perfume factory exploded, and a crew of about 20 guys running around hanging crystal chandeliers from the tent poles. I sat there in my truck for a solid minute, just blinking, trying to process the visual disconnect of seeing a high-end ballroom sitting in the middle of a cow pasture, wondering if maybe I'd hit my head on a fence post and was hallucinating. I got out of the truck, the door slamming, echoing like a gunshot in the night, and stormed over to a guy holding a clipboard who looked like he was in charge. A young guy with a headset who looked terrified as I approached him with mud on my boots and murder in my eyes. "Who the hell are you?" I barked, and he jumped about a foot in the air, dropping his pen. "I'm with Prestige Events," he stammered, adjusting his headset like it was going to protect him. "We're setting up for the Kensington Miller nuptials." "I don't care if you're setting up for the royal wedding," I growled, getting right in his face. "Who gave you permission to be on this land? This is private property, marked, fenced, and deeded." He looked confused, flipping through his papers with trembling hands. "The coordinator, the site rep, she said the permits were all cleared. She said this was the community green space belonging to the HOA." "What coordinator?" I asked, my voice dropping to that dangerous calm that usually precedes a storm. He pointed toward the edge of the field, where a golf cart was parked, and sitting in it, bathed in the glow of a floodlight. She sighed, putting down her wine glass and giving me the look a teacher gives a slow student. "Look, Clint, we adjusted the community boundary maps at the last board meeting. We voted on a variance that designates unused adjacent land as visual easements for special events. It's all very standard. Besides, the wedding is tomorrow at noon. The guests are flying in. The press is going to be here. You really want to be the guy who ruins a young couple's special day just because you're territorial about some grass?" "I'm not territorial about grass," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm territorial about theft. You stole the use of my land because you didn't want to pay for a venue. We're improving the profile of the area," she snapped, dropping the nice act. "Do you know what this does for property values? Having a high-profile event here? It benefits you too, Clint. If you ever decide to sell this dump and let developers build something nice, this is good PR. Now go back to your barn. Let us finish. And maybe I'll send over a bottle of champagne and a plate of leftovers tomorrow." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized two things in that moment. First, she truly believed she could bully me because she thought I was just some dumb hick who didn't understand variances and easements. And second, she had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. My dad didn't leave me money. He left me land and a stubborn streak a mile wide. And looking at Meredith's smug face, I knew that calling the sheriff wouldn't be enough. The sheriff would come, write a report, maybe issue a citation, but the wedding would still happen. She'd still get her way, and she'd learn that she could walk all over me whenever she wanted. No. I needed to teach Meredith Vane a lesson that couldn't be appealed in a board meeting. I needed to show her exactly what rustic chic really meant. "Fine," I said, stepping back from the cart. "You want the meadow view? You got it." She smirked, picking up her wine again. "I knew you'd see reason, Clint. We'll be out of your hair by Sunday morning. Try to keep the noise down tomorrow, okay? We have a violinist starting at noon." I walked back to my truck without another word, drove back to the farmhouse, and sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the distant sound of hammers and drills on my north field. And I started to formulate a plan. I thought about the 300 head of cattle I had in the south pasture. I thought about the industrial irrigation system I'd just upgraded, the one with the high-pressure oscillating heads, designed to soak a field in minutes during a drought. I thought about the visual easement she claimed she had voted on, and I started to laugh, a low, dark chuckle that startled Buster sleeping by my feet. The next morning, the day of the wedding, broke clear and hot, a perfect day for a disaster. I woke up at dawn, not to do my usual chores, but to prep the stage. I could see the activity over in the north field, the catering trucks arriving, the florists setting up arches of hydrangeas that probably cost more than my tractor. They were bustling around, putting the finishing touches on their stolen venue, completely unaware that the landlord was about to conduct an inspection. I went to the barn and hitched up the flatbed trailer to my heavy-duty pickup, the dually with the torque to pull a house, and then I grabbed my ATV and headed to the south pasture. It took me about an hour to round them up. My girls, the Black Angus herd. They were docile enough, used to me and the dogs, but they were also big, heavy, and produced a significant amount of biological waste. I opened the cross-fencing gate, the one that separated the south pasture from the north field, a gate I usually kept locked tight to rotate grazing, and I whistled for Buster. "Come on, boy," I muttered. Let's take the ladies to the party. I drove the ATV slowly, guiding the herd, a shifting sea of black hides and wet noses, moving them steadily toward the rise that overlooked the north field. I stopped just below the ridge, checking my watch. It was 11:30 a.m. I could hear the string quartet tuning up. I could see the guests starting to arrive in shuttles, dressed in their summer best, pastel dresses and linen suits, wandering onto my grass, holding champagne flutes, exclaiming over the view, taking selfies in front of the mountains that Meredith claimed she had a right to. I crept up to the irrigation control box, which sat innocuously near a cluster of trees about 50 yards from where the tent was pitched. This was the master valve for the north quadrant. Usually, I ran it at night on a timer, a gentle mist to keep the clover sweet. But today, I adjusted the flow rate. I cranked the pressure valve all the way to the right, to the setting marked flush, designed to blow debris out of the lines with the force of a fire hose. I set the timer for 12:15 p.m. right when the ceremony was scheduled to start. Then I went back to the herd. I waited. 11:45, 12 o'clock. The music started, Pachelbel's canon, drifting sweetly on the breeze. I could see the bride starting to walk down. The Isla temporary wooden runner laid over the grass, her dress a massive cloud of white lace. Everyone stood up. It was picture perfect. It was the moment Meredith had promised them. The moment she had stolen from me. That I whistled sharp and loud, kicked the ATV into gear, and drove behind the herd, flanked by Buster and my other healer, Daisy. We pushed them hard, getting them moving, getting them excited. We crested the hill, a thundering wave of 1,200 hooves, and poured down the slope directly toward the white tent. You have to understand, cows aren't malicious, but they are curious, and they are hungry, and to them, a wedding venue just looks like a weird new obstacle course full of tasty snacks. The first cow, a big old matriarch named Bessie, trotted right onto the edge of the dance floor, her hooves clattering on the wood, and let out a bellow that drowned out the violin. The guests turned, gasping, pointing, some of them screaming as 300. The clock struck 12:15, and the ground began to hiss. It started as a low rumble, a vibration under the feet of the guests who were already panicking, because they were surrounded by 300 confused cattle. But before anyone could figure out where the sound was coming from, the sprinkler heads popped up, thwack, thwack, thwack. 12 high-pressure agricultural impact sprinklers, positioned in a perfect perimeter around the tent and the ceremony site, roared to life simultaneously. This wasn't a gentle garden mist. This was a deluge. The water hit with enough force to knock the champagne glasses out of people's hands. It arced high into the air and came down like a monsoon, soaking the linen tablecloths instantly, turning the perfectly pressed suits and silk dresses into sodden rags within seconds. The guests screamed a collective, high-pitched wail of shock as the meadow view turned into a mud pit. The ground, which had been dry and firm, instantly slicked up, and that's when the chaos truly blossomed. You add water to a field full of cows and frantic people in smooth-soled dress shoes, and what you get is a scene out of a slapstick comedy. Directed by Satan, people were slipping and sliding, grabbing onto tablecloths for support and pulling the centerpieces down on top of themselves. The bride, poor girl, tried to run for the cover of the tent, but her massive dress absorbed the water like a sponge, weighing her down, and she slipped, going down on one knee right into a fresh cow pie that Bessie had deposited moments earlier. Her mother let out a shriek that I think shattered the crystal glassware on the tables. I sat on my ATV on the ridge, arms crossed, watching the show. It was magnificent. It was the single most satisfying moment of my entire life. Meredith was in the center of the storm, her perfect hair plastered to her skull, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Turn it off! Someone turn it off! This is ruined! You're ruining everything!" She spotted me on the hill. It wasn't hard. I was the only dry person within a mile radius, and she started charging up the slope, slipping in the mud, losing one of her heels, clawing her way up the grass like a swamp creature rising from the deep. She reached me, panting, heaving, looking like a drowned rat in yoga pants. "You," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this. I'm going to sue you for every penny you have. I'm going to own this farm. I'm going to have you thrown in jail for assault. This is domestic terrorism." I just looked at her, calmly took a sip from my water bottle, and reached into my saddlebag. I pulled out a thick envelope, the one I'd prepared the night before with my lawyer, who also happens to be my cousin and hates the HOA as much as I do, actually Meredith. I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria, "This is a cease and desist order, coupled with a formal notice of trespassing, destruction of property, and theft of services. And this," I pointed to the field below where the cows were now happily drinking from the chocolate fountain, "is just standard agricultural irrigation. You know, vital farm maintenance. Can't help it if you decided to host a party in the splash zone, the boundary adjustment," she sputtered, wiping mud from her eyes. "We voted. You can vote to annex the moon, Meredith. It doesn't make it yours," I said, leaning forward. "I checked the county records this morning. There's no variance. There's no easement. You lied to the board, you lied to this couple, and you lied to me because you pocketed the venue fee, didn't you? Prestige Events wrote the check to you, not the HOA." Her face went pale, even under the mud. She froze. That was a guess on my part, a hunch based on how desperate she was to keep this quiet. But seeing the look in her eyes, I knew I'd hit the bullseye. Just then, a man in a soaking wet tuxedo stormed up the hill. It was the bride's father, Mr. Sterling, looking like he wanted to kill someone. He was a big guy, red-faced, fists clenched. He looked at me, then he looked at Meredith. "You," he pointed at Meredith, "you told me this was a permitted venue. You told me you owned this land. My daughter is covered in manure. My wife is hysterical. I just paid you $15,000 for a venue. That is literally under attack by livestock." "Mr. Sterling," Meredith stammered, backing away, It's a misunderstanding. This man is a lunatic." "I'm the owner," I interrupted, tipping my hat to Mr. Sterling. "Name's Clint. Sorry about the mess, sir, truly. But this woman broke onto my property, set up a circus without asking, and refused to leave when warned. I'm just watering my grass and feeding my cows. If you want a refund, I suggest you ask her where that check went." Mr. Sterling turned on Meredith with a fury that made my earlier anger look like a mild annoyance. "You stole my money. You trespassed. I'm going to have the police here in 10 minutes. Already called M," I said cheerfully. "Deputy Miller is on his way. He's going to want to see those permits you mentioned, Meredith."